Thanks, Jared. My guest today is Derrick Pledger, the Vice President and Director of Digital Modernization at Leidos. Derrick, thanks so much for taking the time today.
Jason, thanks for having me today. Looking forward to the conversation.
Derrick, we've heard a lot about the DoD and the cloud, move to the cloud. There's a lot of focus, whether it's big programs or small one-offs. But I think what this really comes down to is, especially for the Army, is their ability to conduct multi-domain operations. And this idea of bringing data to the tactical edge, we hear this time and again, we know it's challenging, but why and how's it going to get easier?
It's a great question, Jason, and thanks again for having me today. I think we should establish sort of a baseline in terms of what we mean by multi-domain operations, because you may elicit different answers depending on who you ask, specifically, as it relates to Joint All-Domain Command and Control, or JADC2. You can imagine in a real war scenario, having the ability to connect, coordinate, and share data across warfighting systems is the difference between life and death. Consider if the US were to face a peer adversary, whether in Europe or the South Pacific, the key to victory is really about data and maintaining a decision advantage. It really does not matter if we have fire superiority or we have better technologies. If it takes our adversary 10 minutes to make a strike decision, but it takes us 20 or 30 minutes, we lose that battle every single time. That said, multi-domain operations is about speed to decisioning and execution. So from the Leidos perspective, MDO is really a warfighting concept that is characterized by exploiting the connection of data, platforms, and warfighters across domains to drive collaboration and decision advantage, whereas JADC2 is more along the lines of the Joint Forces vision to provide the right governance and command and control structures to enable multi-domain operations to be executed. The complexity of today's battlefield dynamics really forces us to ensure that we can compete and contest across all domains, whether that be air, sea, land, space, and also cyber. And the key here is that true multi-domain operations requires a fundamental shift in how we approach system interoperability and modernization. So for us, we think the true challenge is moving from bespoke closed architectures and monolithic systems to more agile, open architectures and non-proprietary frameworks that enable both rapid and iterative capability improvements. The Army and the greater force needs to be able to confront future threats, but we also need to be able to fight today, which requires that we connect our legacy systems and platforms to modern capabilities to enable the better flow of data and intelligence, and ultimately to optimize decision-making across the entire conflict spectrum. So our operational focus centers around, partnering with the government and industry to address these critical challenges that we face as a nation.
I appreciate the definition here, because I think people hear multi-domain operations and they're already going, oh, well, you mean hybrid cloud, of course, right? We're talking about Cloud Exchange, multi-domain, yep. Different. But really, you're putting a finer point on it, which I think is really important. Is that something that you're also seeing from DoD as they talk about multi-domain? They're thinking about it more of a tactical side versus like the JADC2 side of it, which is more strategic?
I think it's a combination of both, and it's not really binary, because you need the strategic pieces, but you also need the tactical. So what I've been seeing in conversations with Paul and others is that fundamentally it boils down to addressing the lack of interoperability of warfighting systems, which is really about breaking stovepipes across data, operators, and mission applications, developing solutions to address bandwidth limitations and tactical comms requirements. So, our forces can continue to fight if you're in an environment that is congested or contested with our adversaries. And then lastly, really maximizing our ability to achieve data centricity across our systems and domains. And data centricity, that concept is really about addressing, incompatibilities of data formats, networks, message formats, as well as platforms. But most importantly, how do you ensure that data can traverse securely, which forces us to build resilience and trust into all of our systems?
You highlighted a common challenge for every agency, whether military services or civilian agencies, which is the legacy IT, the how to bring your legacy systems into the fold when you're talking about, along with your newer systems and more modern systems. And I just want to talk just briefly here about something that I think that's important is this get away from the bespoke closed architecture, more agile, open architecture, non-proprietary frameworks. That has been a call, I think that's been going on for the better part of 20 years. Some agencies are better than others. Do you get a sense that it's gaining more momentum because of this move to the cloud, because of this move to DevSecOps, or what has changed? Why are we still talking about this, and why is it more likely to happen than maybe ever before?
I think two things. I think the cloud certainly has forced us to have some hard conversations around adoption and how are we going to be able to bring in new capabilities that will enhance mission. Because at the end of the day, it's all about a mission outcome. And whether we're using cloud or some sort of edge device to make sure that we get to a mission outcome faster, that's really important for everyone to keep in mind. So we know why we're doing this. We're not just moving to the cloud just because it sounds cool or just because that's what everyone is doing. There needs to be a valid justification in a mission outcome or an efficiency that you will gain by doing so. I think one of the things that has been recognized across the government, the Army, the Joint Forces, that we can't build our way out of the technical debt. So in order to be able to have new systems that will come online, interact with some of the legacy systems that we still need to fight today, we need to be able to, employ microservices architectures where we can keep the old legacy system, not really touch it, but we can add sidecar capabilities to an enhanced capability. And I can do that faster. I can do that in weeks or months, as opposed to spending, $1 billion rebuilding a legacy system, because we just don't have time to do it. So I think the mission is really driving the requirement to be able to, build solutions faster and secure them such that we're able to respond to emerging threats.
We've seen the $1 billion attempt to build out the legacy system just not go well time and again.
Sure.
So I think folks are kind of getting away from that concept so much. I mean, maybe a tank or an airplane's one thing, but when we're talking about connecting systems to share data, I think we've gotten a little better about it. We mentioned this idea of open architecture. Imagine modular systems are in there.
Absolutely.
Non-proprietary systems. And cloud came up, of course. So what are some of the other technologies out there as you kind of look into the near future and future? What are some of the things that DoD's got to start to rely on and bring into the fold?
I believe there are kind of multiple layers to that question. I do think that cloud adoption writ large, as well as increasing the ability to move capabilities and applications to edge environments, it's really a game changer. But there's also some cultural and policy components that are in play as well. So it's not just about the tech, right? It's how is the policy going to move forward to make sure that the tech can be implemented to bring a mission outcome or bring value. I can think of a lot of different use cases to support moving computing to the edge, but there's one that I think everyone can understand. And that is, there's so much data being generated across the force. The notion that you can collect all of this data, bring it back to a central location for processing and analysis is not realistic. First off, this slows the decision-making cycle, which we certainly cannot afford within the context of battle. And then secondly, there's just not enough bandwidth to support this across tactical and enterprise networks that our warfighters are operating on today. So to solve this, I think the Army has it right in terms of the policies and modernization priorities being implemented out of Army CIO's office. You mentioned the Enterprise Cloud Management Agency. There's certainly a recognition that moving applications and capability to the tactical edge is critical for us to maintain operational effectiveness, especially in austere environments. Places where communications are spotty or blocked, and other domains where the robust capabilities that the cloud may bring are not really accessible. And in many cases, the cloud is only as useful as our ability to connect to it, right? So we have a mandate to be able to ensure that warfighters have the capabilities that they need, even when disconnected. So, our approach around from a technology standpoint in MDO hinges on hinges on sort of three technology pillars, I would call them. The first is, digital infrastructure and cyber resilience. The second is mission software and data management. And then the third is, platform integration and interoperability. And how can you build what I would call glueware between our legacy systems and the new capabilities that are out there to make sure fundamentally data can traverse and has access to the warfighting applications that are out there. So building in microservices between those systems is critical. So we're able to address mission requirements now as opposed to rebuilding systems like you mentioned a minute ago.
Let's walk through maybe a couple of those tech pillars too. I think digital infrastructure, cyber resiliency, we know how much focus there's been on cybersecurity, but it's interesting you put them together versus making cyber its own pillar. Help me understand how they're connected.
Yeah, because they are connected and they can't be separate, right? Because cyber is across everything. You know, when we talk digital infrastructure and cybersecurity, what we're really referring to is the management and orchestration of a secure, mission-focused ecosystem that includes networks that can connect to different data repositories, that can connect sensors to shooters via microservices and APIs. So if you think of APIs being in the middle of all these different systems that are out there, that is going to create a larger attack surface for our enemies to be able to vector in on. So when you connect all these systems, you're also increasing the vulnerabilities or your attack posture. So we need to make sure that cybersecurity is baked in as opposed to layering on cybersecurity after the fact. So we're trying to minimize that attack surface so we can defend against advanced cyber attacks and other threat actors.
And the other piece of this, I would just guess here, is when we talk about multi-domain operations, we are talking about new applications, new things being built. So if you, as you're digitizing and modernizing, that cyber discussion is as we hear often, it's got to be up front. And I think layer them together is a more of a don't forget versus just focus on one side. You got to focus on both together. The mission software layer, let's talk a little bit about that. I think that tags back to the pillar one, but when you break that down, what are some of the things that Leidos and the Army should be considering?
Sure. I'd say, here at Leidos, we built what is called an edge to cloud ecosystem, and it touches on two things that you just mentioned, and it is really about how do you provide a secure digital infrastructure to meet modern mission demands. And we're currently working with the Army to make sure that legacy war fighting systems can not only leverage the power of cloud, but can also coexist with the new capabilities that may include autonomous systems, trusted AI, ML, and then intelligent automation, which is really about reducing the cognitive burden on operators who need to use these systems to help get to a command decision, right? You certainly cannot meet mission requirements as outlined by leadership or the Army without having an ecosystem that facilitates real-time data sharing, processing and analysis at the edge. And the foremost goal here is putting the right information in the hands of the folks who need it when they need it in order to drive a command decision. One quick note about mission software and data management to pull on the last two pillars. Mission software and applications are only as good as the information that they have access to, right? So being able to execute data management across cloud, on-premise, and edge environments becomes increasingly important. And then when you add the security dimension to it, meaning how do you secure data that is traversing across our warfighting networks and devices, secure data management becomes probably the #1 priority, considering many of our platforms and our systems are going to need to be interoperable to effectively drive mission outcomes. So again, those APIs, making sure that we can build glueware or microservices quickly to be able to connect new systems, gain critical insight across all of our data is really important for us to be able to have a decision advantage.
You kind of bled into that third pillar, obviously the interoperability piece, and you talked about microservices and APIs. I think that's an important piece. The other side that you didn't get to, though, I'll maybe bring up is this idea of data standards. If you call it a ship and I call it a boat, are we really talking about the same thing? I always love that. There's 6 different ways to describe the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I know that's coming from the CDO's office and DoD as well. There's a big push there, and the DoD CDO. But where does the standards fit into the 3 pillars, and how do you ensure that you're taking advantage of those standards as they're developed, as they're agreed upon within the military services?
So I think the standards discussion comes in with doing data management at scale across different platforms, across different sensors, across different systems. And this idea that we're going to have the joint force agree on 10 different standards or 20 different standards is probably not reality. So I think we need to apply technology in a way to make sure that even if we're not all on the same standard, we have a mechanism to do some transformation for us to get to the same standard, or at least to be able to take data from one system, transform it so it can be consumed by another. So again, when we talk about interoperability, it's not basically saying that, hey, this system needs to talk specifically to this system and here's how, but how do you build in the middleware? How do you leverage APIs and microservices to do that transformation for you? Because we can, if we have a new system that comes online, we can build a microservice very quickly to do that transformation. You're not going to be able to build another system that's going to sit in the way. And I think that's how we're going to be able to modernize the force. And as you keep having more microservices, more of those transformation type services, those other legacy systems, we can start to strangle them away to where we can turn them off and just use the things that we've built to make sure that the mission can still occur.
And that ability to turn it off also means more money that go to mission, better security, because these legacy systems don't have all these old software pieces. So
absolutely.
I know talking to the folks in the Army, that's a big goal of theirs, is to shut down data centers. We're still talking about that, and as well move to the cloud, but also get rid of those legacy systems.
Sure.
Derrick, we spent a lot of time talking in the what if and what needs to be done. Okay, is it going to work in the real world? How do we break it down? Are there examples of edge cloud computing capabilities that actually are meeting mission today? And is the Army kind of doing things that maybe you couldn't have done previously?
I think most would agree that the Army is facing a condition that commanders must maintain the ability to really fight across domains. Think about how dynamic the situation is in Ukraine right now, and how we had to respond very quickly to make sure we're postured to protect our allies and our interests. And at the heart of this domain convergence is really about data, back to the data centricity conversation that we had, and our ability to speed the rate of decision making, so we have an edge against our adversaries. And for us to be able to do this, I think there is a glaring mission requirement for us to move capabilities as far forward to the warfighter as possible, such that critical decision loops are not elongated from a timing perspective. So think about long-range precision fires, where a commander has to make a split decision to eliminate a target. The time component of this process is tremendously important, as we have to be able to reduce the time from sensing when we see something that we have of interest into firing an effect, or whether that be a missile or some other effect. So having analytical capabilities in the battle space where, whether that could be trusted AI solutions that help us to augment target selection or target deconfliction is critical. That same construct applies to virtually everything that the Army does. So, edge computing can really wield the power to vastly improve, missions such as intelligence collecting, leveraging advanced capabilities like AR, VR, AI, ML, even in remote environments where warfighters are disconnected. Just think about how our soldiers need to continue the fight, even if they're not connected to an enterprise or tactical network. If we were in Eastern Europe and some sort of fight broke out today and we're not connected to the larger enterprise, we still need to have capabilities that are on that battlefield that will help soldiers make decisions. That's why it's extremely important for us to be able to move capability as far forward as possible. And those are just a couple examples. And we can go on about that, but I think we don't live in a world where we can generate petabytes and petabytes of data, analyze it, send it back down to a commander to make a decision. We need them to have the autonomy to be able to make the decisions in real time.
So much of this is already digital, meaning they're not looking at paper maps anymore. I guess somebody could be, but the expectation is that they're not looking at paper maps anymore. They're not on a phone that has the wired. You always see in the World War II movies that they're spinning out, spinning cord, right. Copper wire, right? Everything is in that digital world, which makes things both less complicated and more complicated. Is that what's going on here? Is that why we, to tag back to the beginning, that the push for not just cloud but open architectures and creating easier plug and play pieces is why it's so important. That's why we're talking so much about it these days.
I think so. And, just to layer on a couple other examples and use cases that, edge computing and leveraging the power of the cloud can enable. What comes to my mind that you just, maybe really confront is, moving information from sensors to shooters. That's one thing, but What about logistics operations, where we need to be able to accurately analyze and assess what supplies and what capabilities commanders need to be able to execute their mission on the battlefield? Many times we focus a lot on weapon systems and armaments, but without Army logistics operations, none of these missions are possible, right? So we need to be able to equip our logisticians with advanced capabilities to assess what the force needs based on metrics in the atmospherics of the battlefield. And to do that, they need to be able to assess data in near real time, which is all a part of the ecosystem, right? Everything needs to be a part of the ecosystem in terms of being able to expose data to systems that are needed, or we're not going to be able to make the decisions as fast as we need to.
The logistics piece is also interesting. I think as you brought up this idea that, okay, how to get gas to tanks, right? Unfortunately, yep. we're still in the combustible engine. We still have to get gasoline. The supply chain matters. And I think those decisions sometimes get overlooked as far as in terms of where to do a fire launch or where to drop bombs, right?
Right.
It's that logistics piece. If that doesn't have that data, that's I think even more important. Let's just kind of bring this back around also to the cloud piece. As what's the big is as agencies are trying to move to the tactical edge and taking advantage of cloud services, is this a bandwidth issue? Is this more of a what challenge our agencies or the DoD is facing to get the cloud to the tactical edge these days?
Yeah, I think it's a bandwidth issue. It's an operations issue. It is the fundamental challenge is that we know that our environments are going to be heterogeneous, right? There's going to be a cloud component where, mission workloads are running in the cloud. There's going to be a lot of capabilities that are still on-prem. Also, there may be times where moving data, terabytes worth of data into the cloud to do matching or to do some analysis is just not tenable. Some commanders or some decision makers may want their data closer to them. And you're also going to have the edge component. So we need to be able to do management and orchestration across this heterogeneous environment, leveraging the power of cloud, but also augmenting the legacy operations that are out there. So, going back to something I mentioned earlier around providing, secure digital infrastructure for the modern mission, that includes all of those components, right? And we really feel that having this ecosystem is fundamental to support multi-domain operations. So, our edge to cloud approach not only gives you the ability to deploy and manage digital infrastructure across cloud, on-prem, and the edge, but it also provides a mature design pattern where you can modernize applications without impacting or degrading mission operations. And I think that becomes critical when there's a need to propagate new capabilities, new software, mission applications, or critical security updates across the force. And then, one important point that I'd make based on my personal experience is it took a significant amount of time to get new capability out to the field. In the era of great power competition, time is not something we have on our side, right? So nowadays, there are situations that we've developed and fielded capability in weeks or even less than 6 days to address a mission requirement. And the way we did that was by developing in the cloud and being able to deploy across the digital infrastructure to get it out to a warfighter such that they can support a mission. So I think that cloud is a critical piece, and we need to use it as an enabler. But we also, if something just lives in the cloud and it's not supporting mission, in the eyes of the warfighter, it's not real. They need it in their hand to be able to execute a mission. So I think it's a combination of all three. And then the policy needs to layer on top to be able to make sure we don't have to go to 79 different gates to actually get that capability into the hands of a commander.
That's been the one big thing that we've seen Congress and DoD try to work together on, is reducing time to get that new capability to the warfighter. And I think there's been a lot of pilots and a lot of efforts, and I think that's where DoD needs to go next. As you're looking, 6, 12 months from now, as this continues to evolve, we know that DoD has been testing things out with like project convergence, and they're, I think, getting ready for 23. I know also they're testing things out for like the data piece around things like Scarlet Dragon. What's the next step? Where do you think DoD or the Army specifically for this case needs to go next? Where do you hope that they go next? How about that?
I think you mentioned Project Convergence, which I think is very important because it highlights a challenge that the Army has had, which is you bring a lot of capability to Project Convergence and some of the previous exercises, but a lot of it couldn't talk to each other. So it highlights the point around interoperability and being able to build, microservices or middleware such that, sensor systems and, platforms that are participating can actually interact. And how do you do that fast and at scale? So this idea that you have to be able to modernize as we sustain, and you have to expose data such that we can make some decisions, I think that becomes very clear, right? The critical takeaway here is that data is really the new currency of war and armed conflict. And whoever's able to make decisions with more velocity will more than likely win the armed conflict. So, as we move into a time where there's going to be ever expanding networks, there's going to be new platforms and systems that will need to link to aerial assets, vehicles, edge devices, passive sensors, active sensors, that will all be a key part of collecting and processing and communicating intelligence. And we have to have an agile digital infrastructure that gives the commanders the ability to maintain, situational awareness and decision dominance. And how we do that is by taking advantage of a resilient, secure warfighting ecosystem comprised of cloud, on-premise, and edge devices, and being able to manage that at scale. Because the force and the users these days, they want the same experiences on a battlefield that they have at the enterprise, right? They don't want there to be a difference, and they want persona-based, experiences such that they have the tools they need to be able to effectuate decisions, right? And that all leads into operational effectiveness. And I think having that digital infrastructure, having that ecosystem at scale is the only way that we're going to be in the best position to win the fight.
Who knew back in 2006, 2005, when we just started talking about how important data is, that it's really data is everything. And it just shows again, as we talked today, that you can have the best cloud, the best edge device, but if you don't have the data that connects it all, you really don't have much. Derrick, on that note, unfortunately, we're out of time for today. I really enjoyed our conversation. So let me thank my guest. Derrick Pledger is the Vice President and Director of Digital Modernization for Leidos. Derrick, thanks so much for taking the time and joining us today.
Great chatting with you today, Jason. Appreciate it.
Now let me send you back to Jared in the studio for more from the DoD Cloud Exchange.